I think we're going live now. And we will wait just a few minutes here before we get going. Let's see, we have folks joining in right now. Give them one more minute. All right, I know that Congressman Connolly has a busy schedule this afternoon. I know they are doing votes on the Hill, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for attending today, and would like to also basically say that typically we would be having our holiday reception at this time of year. So I saved you from sitting in the traffic on Route 28 to be there, though we really do miss the face-to-face interactions and what have you. So we decided to go ahead and do something more substantive and do a roundtable, a legislative roundtable, a little bit of a wrap up. So I want to thank all the attendees for being here. I want to thank the data staff for putting this together. I'm just the talking head behind all this, and there's a lot that goes into doing this. So I want to thank all of them, Kelly Woodward, Luke Fraza, Sarah McGowan. And for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Doug Pickford. I'm the president and CEO of the Dulles Area Transportation Association. And I also want to thank panelists this year who basically will provide, it's been a crazy year, and will provide us a great insights on what has occurred in the past year, and hopefully some insights on what 2021 holds for us as well. So we have a great lineup. We have Congressman Jerry Connolly, Virginia Senator Jennifer Boysko, Fairfax County Chairman Jeff McKay, and Loudoun County Chair Phyllis Randall as our panel. And we're honored to also have NBC4's Adam Tuss to serve as our moderator. I also want to thank Arrowbrook Center for being a sponsor of today's session. Much appreciated. Just a couple of real quick things. I think everybody who's on this webinar who represents an organization that's been a tough 2020. Data is no exception. We were unable to do a lot of our fundraisers, but in recognition of the economic issues that all of us are facing, we have discounted our membership, and we're in the middle of our 2021 membership drive, and we've extended that discount period to December 20th. So we would really appreciate for all of you to re-up. And if you can bring new members in, that would be much appreciated as well. And for those of you who are actually on our board, we have a board meeting next summer at 3 p.m. And of course, that will also be virtual. I'm not sure if our chairperson is, he's been here, he's here, that's good. So I'm honored to turn this over now to our chairperson, Jeff Fairfield, who is also the president of Arrowbrook Management Corporation. So we'll get things started. I'll turn it over to you, Jeff. You're still muted, Jeff.
I don't know if I can be heard or not. I have no audio. I'm sorry. I have no audio. Obviously a technical snafu, so I apologize. Any event, I guess Doug has thrown it to me. So I want to welcome everybody to the Data Transportation Roundtable. I'm Jeff Fairfield. I'm the nominal chairman of the board of directors. And we're very honored and privileged to have as our moderator this afternoon, Adam Tuss. We remember Adam when he was a beat reporter for WTOP radio, and he was covering Dulles Rail and related Northern Virginia transportation issues. And I was always very impressed because he asked some of the best questions of the people. So he obviously had done his study. But I think he's risen in the world recently. He's now an anchor on Channel 4 weekend. So I'm sure even bigger and better things are coming in the future. But you've kept your hand in regional transportation issues. And there's no better person to moderate this discussion and ask the best questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Adam, and then I'm hoping I get audio back soon so I can hear what everybody says. But thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And we heard you loud and clear right there. And Doug, thank you very much. And thank you to Data for having me as the moderator tonight. And I'll note that I am still covering Dulles Rail as we hope that it comes online later in 2021. My prediction would be, somewhere around late spring, early summer. And as a matter of fact, I believe Metro has put in a start date of July. So we'll see if that actually happens. But it's a good honor, and it's always great to talk about transportation. And before we get to our panel, I just want to kind of talk about, where things stand from my perspective as a reporter still covering transportation. I mean, wow, what a year this has been. I've had to kind of rethink my beat. And I think a lot of people in transportation have had to kind of rethink where they are, because if there's one thing that we never thought was going away, it's traffic in this region. And my goodness, it has. And it speaks to a couple of different things. Obviously, no one would want it this way. But I do think it speaks incredibly to the power of what telework can do. And I do think on the other side of this, when we get to whatever new normal there is, there are going to be a lot of lessons learned. And I'm not sure everybody wants to battle traffic for 2.5 to 3 hours or whatever your commute was as we get onto the other side of this. So I think, more the infrastructure that's going to be really important, obviously, is the technical infrastructure and the data that's going through. So that's going to be really interesting. Never before have we been able to say, I'm going to go from Falls Church to Dulles Airport in 30 minutes. And I live in Falls Church, and I can drive to Dulles Airport, set a clock to it, and that's how long it takes. I can go to Reagan Airport in 30 minutes. I can be downtown in 30 minutes. It is actually incredible. But, we also see some of the other side effects that are happening. Look what happened just this past week with Metro and the incredible cuts to service that they're talking about. Who would have ever thought that we would be talking about ending weekend service? Congressman Connolly has fought so hard for Metro. Obviously, Chairman McKay used to be on the board, and I covered him when he was there. So nobody wants to see it get to that point. But that's kind of where we are in this whole scenario. And we're going to have to learn how to kind of rethink things, and whether or not it actually reprioritizes things is another interesting example. So I believe that we have everyone on. And Doug, you mentioned Congressman Connolly has a busy schedule. So we're just going to go down the list, let them have some introductory thoughts. And then I want to remind everybody that in the chat function here of Zoom, you can type in a question, I can see it. And then as the discussion kind of flows, I can insert that and ask some questions to our panelists here. And I have some of my own questions as well, so we'll keep it moving. But if you do have a question, certainly, type it in and we'll get those questions in. So Congressman Connolly, if you are on, I welcome your thoughts, sir. Congressman Connolly is muted, and this is a common problem of the Zoom generation, and he will figure. There he is.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Adam. First of all, I want to thank Jeff McKay for having a haircut very similar to my own. It's new style. We're trying to start here. And Adam, you could really take a page out of our book. This full-haired, full-bodied, nice black hair it's out of style. At any rate, it's great to be with old friends and so many wonderful friends on this call, and so much history among us all. I feel like I'm at home. I have a prepared speech, but I'm not going to give it. But perhaps I could throw out a few thoughts. You know, the Silver Line, getting the Silver Line, a metro line in the Dulles Corridor, was for the better part of almost 20 years my top priority. And it was a top priority for a strategic reason. The Dulles Corridor is the second most important economic corridor of all of the National Capital Region. Only downtown with the Federal Triangle is more, is a little more successful economically, and the growth is all here. To not have it linked to the nation's capital by its transit system would be, to me, a travesty and only condemn us to a lot more congestion and dysfunctionality in the region, because the growth is going where the infrastructure is not, and where the infrastructure is, there's no growth in the region. And there are lots of other reasons for that in terms of, quality of life issues and other, attracting jobs. But the Dulles Corridor, despite the lack of infrastructure, is profoundly successful. And so we needed to match that. More importantly, we needed, it seemed to me, to anchor Northern Virginia, particularly the largest county, Fairfax, to Metro, to absolutely make Metro integral to our transportation and quality of life future. Because if we weren't, and here's, let me go back to when I was chairman. Arguably, Fairfax, 400 square miles, had 4 stations, all in the eastern part of the county. Most of them actually kind of, not really in the county, but all right. Now contrast that with, Washington, D.C. I don't know, 60 square miles, and they had 45 stations. Now, what does that mean? That means that in Washington, D.C. or Arlington, which had a similar kind of ratio, the probability was enormous that you either lived and or worked within walking distance of a metro station. The opposite reality was true in Northern Virginia. The odds are overwhelming you live nowhere near and work nowhere near a metro station. And that had to be fixed, or the future of Metro itself would be in jeopardy, because the wealthiest jurisdictions, the fastest growing jurisdictions, the biggest economies are all in Northern Virginia. And sooner or later, that sort of disproportionality in terms of service, metro service, and what we're paying by way of subsidies and operating costs, let alone capital dues as well, was going to become a political liability for people like Jeff and Phyllis and others in the region who have to sell that to their constituents. Sooner or later, believe it or not, constituents want something for their tax dollars. A strange concept, but it's out there. So we had to anchor, through the Silver Line, and that's what the Silver Line is. And fortunately, the Loudoun board at the time did have the common sense. Now, we would call it vision under Phyllis, but under the previous board, we just call it common sense, to understand that it was actually in their interest to approve Metro coming to Loudoun County. And I can tell you, I represent Prince William County, and it would love, I think, to have Metro in Prince William County, because it holds back growth, and it condemns them to a congestion that is not going to be pretty in the next 10 or 15 years. And so anyway, we had to do that. It was critical. And frankly, from Metro's point of view, if you didn't anchor the biggest, most successful, economies in the region to your system, sooner or later, you were going to pay a price for that. So, okay. So anyway, we built the Silver Line, and to me, that investment is enormous, and Metro has to honor that investment. If it wants continued support in and remember what makes Northern Virginia different than Maryland or DC, it's the localities, not the state, that fund the operating subsidies. And so we foot the bill locally on our property taxes. And and you can't have subsidy growth every year of 7, 8, 9% as we did. Jeff, you remember this when you first joined our board. Every year it was going up, almost double digit. And what do we get in return? What's the value proposition? And so that's fundamental. Now, building the Silver Line, we had hoped, would answer that question, right? And if you look at the concomitant transit-oriented development that is occurring in the corridor, it is phenomenal. It's enormous. Tyson's, for example, is going to go from a population of roughly 15 to 17,000 to over 100,000 in lightning speed, but all of it transit-oriented, right? All of it around metro nodes. And that's happening in Loudoun, Phyllis, I think, and that's happening in Reston and Herndon, Jennifer. So, I mean, we're looking at really smart growth with, I think, lots of positive environmental benefits. And that's what Metro's investment can mean for a community. All right, now we're at COVID. And once again, Metro is giving a proposition that I think is a tough sell. I want you to raise your subsidies, Jeff and Phyllis, and I want you to accept deep service cuts that disproportionately affect Northern Virginia. And the Silver Line in particular, and suck it up. And, meanwhile, your own budget is taking enormous hits because of the pandemic, because of the economic decline. Thank God housing values have held up, but we don't know how long that's gonna be true. And God knows, Jennifer, the state budget has taken a big hit because you're more reliant on other sources of income, obviously income taxes and so forth, that are taking a hit. So I am worried about that proposition. I'm also worried about the long-term recovery of Metro because you were talking about this, Adam. Telework has taken hold. It's no longer a novel kind of exotic thing. It actually, and what we saw during this pandemic is the high point of telework among federal workers, my benchmark, was about 21%. You're probably well over 50% right now who are routinely teleworking. And that proves that, the capacity and the demand is almost limitless, but that has a direct hit on Metro because the largest single beneficiary of Metro every day is the federal government. The largest single user of Metro every day are federal employees and contract employees. And if they're not going to work, they're teleworking. Metro's projected revenue recovery is going to be much more sluggish and slow than we think. And we got to look at that. My final point, I guess I want to make is what can we expect from the feds? I wrote my colleagues in the Appropriations Committee and urged them to give a $32 billion bump to transit in the United States. Now, remember, in the CARES Act, we did $25 billion, and I believe that translated for Metro into about $800 million of federal assistance in the spring. It's not enough because the pandemic's going on a lot longer than we thought, and they're taking a big hit. And so my view is, okay, we got to come in and keep a level of maintenance of effort so that we're not laying people off, that we're not losing capability, we're not, neglecting maintenance and so forth. And so my number was 32 billion, a little bit bigger than what we provided in the spring. The number in the HEROES Act right now is 25 billion. And there's additional money in the Infrastructure Act that we have passed that will have to be revisited in the next Congress by the next administration. My concern, I don't know that we have a number in the bipartisan. Okay, so the number in the so-called bipartisan bill that was just announced this week drops it to 15 billion. I guess that's better than zero, but it's a lot less than 25 and less than half of my number, 32. So when that gets negotiated, who knows what the final number will be. So I think there will be some relief, but I don't think it's going to be as substantial as we need. And that means we are going to take a hit in cutbacks, in layoffs, and in subsidy increases. And final point, I believe the federal government is a free rider when it comes to the utilization of Metro. It needs to pay its fair share in operating subsidies, like every other compact member. Just providing capital is not sufficient, though it's a good start. The good news is I think we do have bipartisan support for the 150 million and actually growing it in the infrastructure bill we passed. It grows. I have a metro bill that would grow it even more and would for the first time provide an operating subsidy. And I think that's something we need to continue to hammer on to take the pressure off our local governments in Northern Virginia and for the federal government to stop getting a free ride. With that, forgive me for going on so long, but there's a lot from our perspective up here I wanted to share, and I wanted to give a little bit of history of why the Silver Line and the Dulles Corridor is so important. Thank you.
And obviously, Congressman, you're not just dealing with Metro on your level, you know, New York City, all the other transit systems, so many transit agencies are in the exact same spot. I think, you know, Metro is asking for about $500 million, 500 million, just to get them through the next fiscal year. So they're in a tough spot. Senator Boysko, how do you see it playing out? You know, I think the Congressman makes a really interesting point. How long can these, you know, I don't hear many people talking about home prices and housing values. Who knows if that's the other side of this coin to flip? Oh, Senator, you have to unmute. Unmute. Yes, but you have to unmute. If you tap the bottom, you'll see the microphone. There you go.
It's not going to let.
There you go. You're on.
Am I? Okay, good. I was trying to. I will tell you, Adam, that I live in Herndon and represent kind of the northwestern Fairfax, eastern Loudoun. Our real estate economy is going really, really well. In fact, in my own neighborhood, I have watched no fewer than 8 or 10 big houses change hands since the COVID, you know, since the shutdown happened, and that's just in my own neighborhood. It's going to be interesting to see how we, you know, move through this. I serve as the chair of the Broadband Advisory Council, and so I'm very interested in making sure that we maintain the ability for everybody to do telework. And I think that in our neck of the woods where technology is king and where we have so many contractors, our economy has done a good bit better than in many other areas of the state and the nation, because people have been able to keep their jobs and telework, even though it's been challenging. I'll tell you, this is my new office. I am here on Zoom at least 5 hours every day, and has been pretty successful in being able to meet all the people that I need to meet with. And I appreciate not having to get in my car and drive too. If we want to look at, you know, what's happened with the General Assembly this past year, the Senate really made some huge strides in transportation, specifically around funding and changing the structure of the way we do our gas tax, putting on hybrid vehicle funding formulas for their use. We have a new piloted program for miles used. These are some of the things that we've talked about in data in past meetings, where we're really starting to think out of the box a little bit. And I'm really excited to see that in the legislation that Senator Saslaw and Speaker Fillercorn carried this past year, that I was a co-sponsor on, we are moving in the direction of diversifying and making sure that we are responsibly moving into the 21st century. For the first time, we have actually indexed the gas tax and raised the gas tax, and that will help give stability to our funding source. Unfortunately, you know, with COVID, we had to put a bunch of our priorities on hold, and it was really estimated that we were gonna in the General Assembly, we had expected that we would generate about $870 million for transportation. Once COVID hit, it was estimated that we would actually lose almost all, you know, just a massive amount of that. Once we've looked at the reforecasting in late October, things are looking a little bit better than they were. I think primarily because our economy is a little bit stronger than we had anticipated, because we were being very conservative with our numbers. But it appears that we're about $100 million above the revised forecast. And so it looks like the reductions will be closer to about 500 million, which is actually better. Our legislation also contemplated flexibility of implementation of new formula allocations, so giving us again more flexibility on how we do it. And we've given the ability to work with our local governments, and I know that Chair Phyllis and McKay will talk about how we've shifted some of our funding to put the things that we have to pay for immediately up front instead of putting everything in order as we would have. I also serve on the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. I'm the Senate's only member, and I serve with our chair, Phyllis Randall, and with Chairman McKay, and have enjoyed that. You know, there are things that we have been concerned and caring about, including restoring our funding for NVTA that was taken in 2018, and we will continue to hammer that to get those dollars back. Congressman Connolly was so good to talk about the short-term relief with the CARES Act, and we're hopeful for more revenues from the federal government. And he is a champion on, advocating for our community. I will say that back before I was an elected official, I served as aide to Supervisor John Faust and got to work under Chair at that time, Connolly's leadership, and just appreciate the forethought in the transit-oriented development planning around the Silver Line Metro. I got to do the planning for our region in Western Fairfax County. And so, I think the collaborative approach that we take, working with our different partners in leadership in local government, state government, federal government, as well as with our associations and business community, is a model that the rest of the country should take notice of, because we really do work collaboratively and feed off of one another, getting great ideas and implementation. We are going into the 6-year planning process soon with NVTA, and I look forward to that. We are, this past year, during the pandemic, we still invested $539 million in regional funds on 21 regional projects that are multimodal transportation here in Northern Virginia. The authority is advancing 106 regional multimodal projects, including things right here in our neighborhood, totaling $2.5 billion for congestion reduction in Northern Virginia. So, I mean, this is a real celebration. I also wanted to tell you that just yesterday, I received a report on the Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund. And that was something that I wasn't that familiar with, but it really hit a bone with me for this group, especially because it talks about innovative ways of harnessing technology and transportation together to make sure that we are really being thoughtful and using our resources the best way. So there is a Northern Virginia regional multimodal mobility program that takes a collaborative and cohesive approach to safety, accessibility, mobility, and mitigating congestion for the traveling public. And it uses AI as well as machine learning algorithms to help people make real-time decisions about their travel. There are going to be continuing projects going forward with that. There are going to be some local pilot programs for innovation, and there will be calls for partnerships on that, which businesses that DATA's members might be interested in. I'm happy to follow up with you separately to give you more detail about those. And we'll continue, continually looking for local level, locally derived solutions to fund and to work with. But, as a member of this group, I just want to thank you all for your innovative participation. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person, and I look forward to hopefully next year being able to be here in person with you, and look forward to hearing from our conversation. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Boysko. And I want to remind everyone who's on this chat, If you move your mouse over the Zoom screen, you'll see a little button that says chat at the bottom. If you have a question, type it in there. I can see it and we can ask and facilitate the discussion with everybody that way. Chairman McKay, let's move on to you. I saw you recently at an event and I've asked you for some help on a couple of stories recently. And we talked about the need to continue looking forward because eventually this will end. And what will happen on the other side of it. So obviously as chair of this huge county where transportation is so important, yes, the congestion has gone down, but there's so many things happening here, I-66, the express lanes, the Legion Bridge project that all but, kind of stopped in its tracks. How do you continue to push for those projects when it looks to some like we may never need those projects ever again?
Well, first, thank you, Data, for having us. It's good to be with friends. And the good news is when you're with Congressman Connolly and Senator Boysko and you're in such violent agreement on issues, they leave you little to discuss. But I do want to share a few thoughts with you. And Adam, it's good to see you. I can say I knew you when you were doing Sprawl and Crawl back in the early 2000s when you were covering the Metro board. So it's always good to be with you. I think we have to keep a couple things in perspective here because I continually hear from people about reductions in congestion and these things. And yes, that's true. But with transportation planning and financing, Jerry just outlined the silver line. That didn't happen overnight. These projects of this magnitude take a long time to go through a process to achieve funding, to build and to put into action. And so while we may have a blip right now, and even if we have a structural change in attitudes about people going to the workplace, if you just look at our population growth and you go back in history, it wasn't that long ago that Virginia, under a different regime, was so badly underfunding transportation that we couldn't even get roads paved. And so when we look at all the big projects that have been able to be done because we started investing in transportation, both at a state and local government level, many of those projects are what you're seeing out there being constructed now, but our starting point was so far behind that we have a long way to go before we have the type of infrastructure system in Northern Virginia that really will sustain not only today, but our long-term growth. And so I always encourage people not to overemphasize the here and now in transportation because you have to plan for the future, not for conditions that exist today. And these travel habits will change. I am very worried about future of transportation funding. I know that we just adopted our legislative program in the county for both the state and federal governments, and in Virginia, restoring NVTA funding, and I'm sure Phyllis is going to go after this in a minute, is the #1 priority we have because people will remember when Metro funding counted against Northern Virginia, even though Metro brings in tremendous revenue for the Commonwealth of Virginia, not just for Fairfax County, Loudoun, and other regional governments in Northern Virginia, but significant money for the Commonwealth. And when that was counted against our NVTA funding, we know that 50 million of the 102 million that was lost has been restored, but we're still behind. And so in Fairfax County, that means projects, will be delayed as we move forward unless that funding is restored. And so we must keep investing in infrastructure, even if you look out your window and see that conditions are improving. One good thing that the pandemic has brought us is our ability to expedite construction on projects that are already in the works. That reduction in congestion has allowed our workers to get out there and expedite these projects. Imagine if we didn't have any of these projects in the work when the pandemic hit and we weren't able to take advantage of that opportunity. And so another illustration of the long-term planning benefits of transportation. You brought up real estate a moment ago. You asked me about kind of the future and how things are looking. Absolutely true that residential real estate is going through the roof. We're seeing that in Fairfax County. But what people don't understand is that residential real estate traditionally is a cost for local governments because we're putting those kids in schools and providing services to those folks. The real relief in our budget is what's happening on the commercial side. And that's what I fear the most because Office spaces were before the pandemic, were already getting smaller. We know that there's going to be a compression in office. We know what was happening in retail, brick and mortar retail, which is a key to our tax base before the pandemic. Those things will have long-term systemic effects on local government's budgets. And so while real estate may have ticked up, it in the long run is probably going to not be enough to offset the impact of a compressed commercial real estate environment. And so, we do need to be very cognizant as we move forward. And so that really points to the tremendous importance of what Jerry was talking about, federal assistance. I can't emphasize this enough, and Metro is probably the best illustration of this. I recently wrote an editorial in the Washington Post about this, the importance of Metro and the importance of federal support, not just for the relationship to our federal employees, but for the overall economy. And one of the things that people forget is, transportation should not be partisan. And when I look at Metro, it's almost turned into this partisan argument, which is absurd. One of the biggest beneficiaries of Metro right now is the people who are building the Metro cars in rural United States that have no affiliation to Metro other than we're spending and creating thousands of jobs to build new Metro cars in rural United States, red areas. And so this isn't a matter of whether or not Metro only helps certain areas. Metro is essential to our workforce, it's essential to our economy, and transit, if you look at it across the country, is where most of the economic growth is happening around transit. And so if we're not able to fund Metro and expand Metro and fulfill the commitments we've made on the Silver Line to make sure that service comes to where we have slated it to come, then local governments are going to be in a harder situation with our tax base trying to recover from the pandemic. And so all of these things interrelate to each other. And I would make the argument that when the economy is tough is not the time to be cutting infrastructure. Maybe things can be done more economically, but we must be planning for the infrastructure needs of the future, not this time and place today. And we must be doing things like supporting, Jerry mentioned before, supporting his Metro Accountability and Investment Act. I mean, having Metro operating support is key. Making sure that, the commitments of PREA funding for Metro that have been committed to happen. Making sure that the capital improvements that Metro still needs to make moving forward because of a lack of dedicated revenue actually happen. And these things, you look at the Metro budget, you mentioned it earlier, $500 million is what they're looking at, $500 million. I don't think people understand the magnitude of that, and everything in the region will be affected by that. You want to get people back to work, you can't do it if you don't have a transit system to carry them. And the last thing, I do want to mention on transit, because it's something that's not often talked about. I just got the statistics about Metro ridership reductions since the pandemic began. And Jerry mentioned earlier about the Silver Line coming out, into Western Fairfax. But what was stunning from those statistics is that Metro ridership loss was lowest in areas of lower income. So when you look at Metro and who's riding it today, these are people that have to ride it. They need it to get to work. And if they weren't going to work, the rest of us who didn't have that luxury, who can sit at home on Zoom calls, wouldn't have the services that we need. And so there are a ton of people who rely on Metro that can't just stay at home. And we owe it to them and our economy, and to look at this also from a socioeconomic standpoint and say that Metro does more than carry people to their offices. It literally carries our essential workers, and Metro ridership is only down around 50% on the rail. On the yellow line, on the blue line, it's down almost 90% in a lot of other lines that serve our region. And so we also have to be thinking about this from an equity standpoint. And if we are to recover better in this economy, you don't do that by hurting the people who literally are carrying this economy right now and going to work every day. And if we want more people to return to the workforce, and particularly our federal workers, we must have a Metro system that not only is well funded, but is not looking at draconian $500 million cuts. And we all know on this call that it's going to take the federal government to do that. And Jerry's a champion of that. We need more champions like that. There's no way local government with its loss of revenues, or even the Commonwealth with the challenges that it's facing, is going to be able to overcome a $500 million hole in the metro budget. And so without a federal stimulus, we are doing our economy danger. We are harming our social equity compact with the people in our community. And all of us lose when that happens. And so I appreciate data. I appreciate what you do for advocacy, for transportation, and for infrastructure, and for transit, and for understanding how all of these things relate together to our economy and how important they are, probably more important than ever, arguably in some ways, in the midst of a pandemic. And so I thank you for giving me a few moments to share thoughts with friends, and certainly look forward to the questions.
Yep. Thank you, Chair McKay. And obviously we should talk about buses too, because the buses, as you mentioned, they're still carrying upwards of 100,000 riders a day. So, that's really a critical piece that you mentioned that's cutting across so many different lines. And Metro often does that with so many different things. Chair Randall, let's get to you. Obviously, I drive out along the Dulles Toll Road and I see those beautiful new Metro stations out there. They look great. There's already some economic development around them, but you do have to wonder, when all that will kind of be ignited. What can you tell us about that, and how are you seeing it? I remember when the vote passed to approve Metro in Loudoun County. So it's great to finally see it actually happening.
Yeah, I remember that vote too. I was sitting in my house cheering for the vote to happen, and it did. And then the next term I was chair of the county, so it was fantastic. So first, Data, thank you for having me. And let me say, everybody in this call, one thing about, there's so much, 2020 has been so hard for everybody. For those of us who are extroverts and really like people, it's been extremely hard not to see everyone. So it's great to see everybody. Chairman Connolly, it's so good to see you. And I've seen Jeff and Jennifer, but only on Zoom calls. So I look forward to seeing you all again in person. So, the question is going to be, it really is, what are the traffic patterns and transit going to look like post-COVID? And of course, we really have no idea. What we know, and Jennifer alluded to this, and Jeff alluded to this, is that we now realize that telework, telehealth, telemedicine can be done from home, and can be done from home well. Not to mention, employers have realized, because of telework, they don't have to spend as much on their brick and mortar buildings, and they don't have to spend money on their employees and toll and things like that. However, people also forget that by profession, I'm a mental health therapist, and there is another side to people not having human interaction and not seeing one another as much. And so I do believe that you're going to see ridership come back, and you're going to see traffic come back, but maybe not to pre-COVID levels, maybe never, and certainly not for a long time. You may have employers who have people in work 2 or 3 days a week versus all 5 days a week. I think that's going to be probably the most likely thing that's going to happen. So we'll have to see how that's all going to turn out and look. Of course, in Loudoun County, as well as the new Civil Line stations that have sprung up out the ground, and that, to answer your question, Adam, we still believe we're going to see Metro in Loudoun ready to go in about July. The package that Mr. Weederfield put forward, that Jeff talked about, the $500 million cuts, and I'll talk about those in a little while. None of that was whether the Silver Line will come to Loudoun. We still expect the Silver Line to be in Loudoun right around July, and we're still hoping for that. But in addition to the Metro, in Loudoun County, we also have Dulles Airport. And so many of our people who work in Loudoun, who live in Loudoun County, work at Dulles Airport. And unfortunately, Dulles Airport has seen, drop-offs of 90% plus. And so a lot of people in Loudoun County have been affected by that. What we know in Loudoun is about 85% of all people have been able to keep their jobs, and pretty much at their same pay structure, because it's a very tech-heavy county. But those 15% who have not been able to keep their jobs are people who are in the touch industry. So grocery stores, restaurants, and hotels, event planners, those types of things. And for those people, the things that Jeff McKay just said is so spot on correct. He kind of took my statement that transit is not just an economic issue. Transit is a justice issue. And when we have cuts in transit, the people who are less able to absorb those cuts they still have to get to work. They still have to, normally oftentimes it's the bus, but not always. And so cuts in transit really are going to negatively affect the people who are just least able to absorb that and take it. And so it is going to be, and I have been talking about the federal government's role in Metro for 5 years now. And what I always say is, Metro moves the federal government's workforce. That's what Metro does. And so if Metro is not being funded correctly, then the federal government is not moving. Now, there are some people who might say, that's great, that's fine, no problem. But the truth is, we need the federal government to be able to work and work efficiently. And that is done with Metro. And so the fact that, we look at capital costs or just renewing the cost every year that the federal government puts in the Metro, I sit on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and there was never a time we have a discussion about Metro that I do not bring up the fact that the federal government does not put enough in, does not pay their fair share. And the idea that in this funding package of CARES Act, it was only $800 million, and the next funding package is already down to $15 billion. That is almost scandalous. That is just not acceptable. And the other part of that $500 million cuts to Metro, those are human beings. Like, those are moms and dads and students and people who need to have their jobs and need to get around and need to work. So we talk about this stuff in dollars and cents in the economy, and we forget that there's a human factor to these things. And those are human beings who, by no fault of their own, find themselves in this situation. And, the localities and the states just can't do it. I mean, you just can't. We need the federal government to help at this really kind of tumultuous time. I will talk just a bit, as Jeff alluded to, about the Northern Virginia Transportation Association, NVTA. Of course, NVTA in House Bill 2313 many years ago gave localities the ability to tax ourselves in 3 ways: grantor's tax, TOT tax, and gas tax, to put money into building roads or doing congestion relief relative to costs to get people moving in Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia's economy is incredibly important to Virginia. Northern Virginia's economy is incredibly important to the region. And so having a transportation system that moved was really, really important. Now, I will say, there is nobody on MVTA, nobody in this call, no local official that doesn't realize how important Metro is. But when you take $100+ million out of MVTA, that hurts, because we taxed ourselves to put money in the MVTA. And the way we got that $50 million back, some of it was state money, but some of it was retaxing Northern Virginia for a second time to get it back in there. And we're still low, about 32 million. And now I'm hearing legislators, even one from Northern Virginia, talking about taxing us again. And I will tell you, I will fling myself around in front of the State House in Virginia before I let us get taxed for a third time for money into MVTA. That should be state money, because we've already been taxed for that 2 times already. And so that's something that's going to be really, really important. Finally, I will say that, in Northern Virginia and in this region, I think we are so unique because we work so well together, and we have to, because, people live in Loudoun and work in Fairfax. So they live in Montgomery County even, and work in Loudoun County with such, we live, work, learn, and play in each other's jurisdictions. And most people do not even know, when they're driving down 28, when they left Loudoun and hit Fairfax, and when they left Fairfax and hit Prince William. They don't know. They know that they just want their traffic to work, and traffic and transit has to work almost seamlessly throughout the Northern Virginia region, but also throughout the entire metropolitan Washington region, if we're going to keep this economy moving. And yes, as somebody said, all the infrastructure that's going up around the Silver Line stations, around the metro stations, is going to also be and will be very important. But there are people who are going to live at the Ashburn station who are going to work in Fairfax County and vice versa. And so what we do and how we do this regionally is so important, which is why I think I'm so appreciative of data, because you all know this and you're talking about this in a regional, at a regional place. So I can talk about this all day. When you have 4 people on who are transportation nerds, we could probably sit here all day, and Adam too. You too, Adam. I guess you say 5 people. We could talk about this all day.
Yeah.
So I'll stop, and I look forward to questions also. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll remind everyone, I see that there are 37 participants in this forum here. So please type a question in the chat. It won't work if I try to get to everyone and unmute you and do that. It'll be a madhouse. So please just type the question in. I'll read the question and we'll go from there. But Congressman Connolly, you know, obviously a lot of people are talking about trying to get from one side to the next out of all of this. Let's throw in the fact that we also think we're going to have a new administration, right? So how does this all kind of play in transitioning from, you know, one side to the next? Who amongst your colleagues are you kind of, you know, forming alliances with to help move some of this money? And please unmute, Congressman. Yeah, you have to. Oh, the host has to unmute you. The host has to unmute Congressman Connolly, please. There you go.
All right. Okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah. I bet that was Doug Pickford keeping me on mute, right, Doug? It's good to see you again. I knew Doug's mom and dad very well. So first of all, let me correct how you put it. There's no question about who the next president of the United States is. It's not something we're speculating about or hoping for, or no, we had an election, it was decisive, 306 electoral votes, 6.5 million vote margin, largest vote for any president in the history of America. This is done, this is over, and we have a president-elect who will be sworn in about 50 days. And, you know, I know I'm the only former Biden staff member in the US Congress. I worked for Biden for 10 years. And I can tell you, you know, first of all, this is a man who used transit every single day, twice a day to go to work from Wilmington, Delaware to Washington, D.C. Now, he did that based on a tragedy. When he lost his wife and baby daughter less than a month after being elected in 1972 to the United States Senate, he vowed that if his 2 sons recovered, who were also in the car accident, he would come home every night to them. They were little boys. And so he kept that pledge. He never bought a house in Washington. He commuted back and forth every single day to Wilmington, Delaware, which is, you know, a couple hours, several hours. So he used Amtrak every day, twice a day. And that forged his view about how important transit is in especially certain corridors, like the Eastern Corridor. So we got a friend in the White House. Start with that. And whoever he picks as his transportation secretary will absolutely mirror that, you know, echo that. They will be an advocate for and friend of transit. And I would commend you. I keep mentioning, you know, the bill that we passed a few months ago, the Moving Forward Act, which is a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. And it's got lots of transit provisions in there, including for our metro system. And I would commend that because I believe that's going to be the blueprint for the next administration. So if you want to know, well, what are Democrats likely to do? What's the new majority going to do, or the new White House? I think look to that bill, because that lays out policies and philosophy that are going to be good guideposts for a very robust, bold, you know, vision for America and a set of investments for America that would bring us into the 21st century in terms of a transportation network. You know, I just said, you know, I always give the speech where, you know, if you want to be a great country, you're going to make 3 big sets of investments: education, research and development, and infrastructure. If you don't make those three, I guarantee you, you are going to slip in terms of competition, competitiveness, and greatness. America has always done that. You know, even during the Civil War, you know, we created the land grant college and university system, which was, you know, the embryonic R&D system in agriculture, but it grew into lots of other things. We started, you know, the Homestead Act to help empower people to develop land. We did the Transcontinental Railroad in terms of infrastructure. Even during the Civil War, we were making these investments. You know, the worst cataclysm arguably ever to hit America, the Civil War, and nonetheless, we had vision about the future and the investments we needed to make. Do we have that same, you know, vision and intestinal fortitude? And let's start with infrastructure. We can't let it go. I was in China a few years ago. Everything's new. Brand new high-speed rail, brand new subway systems, brand new port facilities, brand new airports, brand new roads and bridges. It is unbelievable when you see it. And as someone coming from local government, I mean, I was dripping with envy. Like, how did they do this? You know, rail to Dulles took 50 years. We debated that and argued it and futzed around for 50 years. If your major infrastructure investments take 50 years, you might as well hang it up. Might as well just hand over the keys to the future to the Chinese, because we're clearly not going to compete. And that has to change. And so finding a blueprint for an infrastructure approach that's going to get us moving again, literally and metaphorically, really important.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman Connolly. Senator Boysko, what's the sense that you get, you know, coming out of Richmond on kind of a lower level, but still just as important? What kind of sense do you get in terms of, you know, the appetite for funding, specifically in Northern Virginia?
Well, as Adam, thank you for the question. As you know, we are still working through the forecast for the next year. They're better than we thought they were, but we're still being very cautious. We expect it's going to be a skinny year as far as new projects and investments. I, you know, think that we had such a big year last year and made so many big changes from investments in our schools and universities, our broadband, for instance. When I joined the Broadband Advisory Council in 2016, we had $1 million to spend for the entire state. Now we have invested $85 million over the next 2 years, plus another $35 million in CARES funding. So we are making some major investments very selectively and carefully. We're going to have to, you know, look at making sure if the pandemic, if we get a vaccine, that's going to be good for our economy. You know, our forecast is going to be better. Depending on what the federal government does for us, so much is just kind of in the balance right now. And so we have been told to hold our breath and not to expect any big new spending that would be an ongoing cost. We do have some ability to do some one-time cost things this next year, but we're really tightening our belts and trying to ride it out. But our hope is and expectation is that things are going to get better, that we are on track for a full recovery in the next few years. And so we're not straying from what our plans had been. As Jeff McKay said, there is absolutely no reason now for us to just absolutely cut everything,
Sure.
But we're not adding anything new, I guess, or very limited things.
And I'm sure that's hard for Secretary Valentine to hear, because she just hit the ground running and just wanted to, you know, push on a lot of transportation projects, which is often what you have to do to get them going.
Yeah, and she's just been so good. I mean, really, she's somebody who's really willing to look outside of the box. And I'll be working with them on and looking at putting electrification of the transportation system into our energy plan, which I think is a really neat concept. So we're killing two birds with one stone, one in, you know, saving fuel, but also in our infrastructure, you know, new infrastructure bill that will diversify our income.
Gotcha. Chairman McKay, we got a question in the Q&A, and it has to deal with Metro funding. And as a former Metro board member, maybe you can give us some insight into how they, and this is, always a tough one for a journalist too. There's the operating budget, there's the capital budget, and then there's the preventative maintenance, and there's a whole bunch of different pots that Metro tries to protect. The question is, do you think it was wise for Metro to take some of the money it got from the CARES Act to reduce local operating subsidies, but that may have created a deeper hole for the next fiscal year? It's never easy when you talk about the money and the shifting with Metro, is it?
No, it never is. And before I answer that, let me just tack on a thought on the previous question too, because I think it's important for us at local government. Not only do we think this administration will be better for infrastructure, but we have been on our own responding to this pandemic. And frankly, if a vaccine was available today, we would be killing ourselves literally to convince people that it was safe to take the vaccine. And without that, we can't get our economy going again. And so for me at local government, it sounds nonsensical that I'm saying this, but we need someone who actually will tell the truth about the pandemic, will work with us on providing the means to test people, and will certify and build confidence in the public to take the vaccine so that we can get our economy going again, to do all the things we've talked about on this call. And so while there's a lot of great hope for this administration in a lot of areas, my greatest hope is we can start with leveling with people and focusing on recovering and getting people back to work. And I think this is the first real shot we've had at this for the last year. And for local governments, if we can't get people back to work, I can't get our economy going again. And so the importance of this administration, regardless of your politics, it cannot be understated to have somebody who will tell the truth about this pandemic and get us going again. But the question is a really good one about Metro. And as you know, there's different buckets of money, as you just identified. And as the congressman mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges at Metro is the sources of those revenues. So we in Virginia at local government push hard to get relief in our jurisdictional subsidy at a time when our economy is hurting. That's coming from property taxes, ultimately. And we just talked about what's happening with commercial property taxes. Maryland and the district are different. They have different sources of revenue to generate their funds to pay their Metro subsidy. And so they have a diversity of revenue sources that county governments don't have. And so, this is one of the reasons we pushed for so long for federal support for Metro that is sustainable, PREA funding that is guaranteed every year. As the congressman mentioned, for operating subsidy support, because operating subsidy is the thing that can fluctuate the most from year to year. And frankly, from the state, who's come forward and finally put some capital money on the table that we're grateful for, and that is essential for Metro to move forward. And so, yes, for local governments, a subsidy reduction is going to be critical to help us get through the next couple budgets. And frankly, I'll just be direct on this, because if we weren't pushing for that, if it weren't in our budget interest to do that, because our budget is hemorrhaging tens of millions of dollars because of the pandemic, we would also be sending a message to Congress and to Jerry's colleagues that it's okay. You guys don't need to chip in any more money. Local governments will just keep finding the money and putting it in. Frankly, this is a hard challenge for Metro to deal with. But I talked earlier about being truthful about the pandemic. We need to be truthful about Metro. It cannot survive by reaching into the pocket of local government, who relies over heavily on real estate taxes in an economy like this to continue to operate it. And so we had no choice but to push for and push back on jurisdictional subsidy support. And by the way, that was an NVTC regional position. It wasn't Fairfax's, it wasn't Loudoun's, is the mayors and chairs and the boards and city councils of the entire region said, we cannot increase our subsidy right now. And so that left Metro with this draconian budget that has significant cuts to it. But people need to understand local governments have so many priorities right now. Metro, of course, is one of them. But if we had more help with getting ourselves out of this pandemic in the first place, we might not even be having this conversation. But it's a tough one. Adam, you've been there, you followed Metro. There aren't good choices here short of federal support. I mean, there really aren't. And without a federal stimulus bill that funds Metro adequately, we're going to be in this not for this year's budget. We're going to be in this for many years to get out of the type of hole that we carved here. The last thing I want to mention, because it's critical. Metro is run by some individuals who have very special skill sets. And so if this budget moves forward and we don't get federal support and the types of layoffs that have to happen, you can't just in a week go out and hire train operators, bus drivers who are highly skilled personnel. We had this debate with our schools, with schools closed. People said, why couldn't you just get rid of all the bus drivers? Well, first, that hurts our economy. Second, they have CDLs and they have training regimens they have to go through. And third, if schools open next week, I can't go out and find thousands of trained bus drivers. They're not just hanging out on the corner of a street. And so when we look at these budget cuts, we've also got to think this isn't a year. We could be doing many years of damage without federal stimulus support.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much, Chairman McKay. And yeah, I can't imagine that there's any appetite for a Metro fare increase either. That's going to be one that just, you can't even present that at this point in time. So
no, you can't. And frankly, Adam, I've actually asked our connector service what the cost would be of waiving bus fares altogether right now to help, some of those employees we talked about earlier get to work. If anything, we need to be going in the opposite direction to stimulate ridership. And so you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. Chair Randall, we have a question in the Q&A here about the air traffic rebound and what could possibly happen at Dulles International Airport. Obviously, once upon a time, I think someone called Dulles a white elephant that you could roll a bowling ball down it and that wouldn't hit anybody because nobody used it. Obviously, that changed. And on the local level, for anyone who's on this chat who doesn't know, the Airports Authority has actually been trying to push a lot more traffic to Dulles Airport because Reagan National Airport is exploding. So they've been trying to push a lot more domestic travel to Dulles. But it is disheartening to walk through these airports. I've done it plenty of times during this pandemic and see them as empty as they are. How much does it concern you that the air traffic just isn't there right now and that people are still nervous to fly?
Yeah, I am very concerned. Well, so first let me say that I would, say hear to everything that my friend and colleague Jeff McKay just said about how we got into this position and why we are here, and the fact that local government over the next many months, we are the ones that are going to be distributing a vaccine. And so on top of everything else we're doing, we have to figure out how to distribute the vaccine and get it into communities that are already suspicious because for ridiculous reasons, the pandemic was politicized. And so now people don't trust the information they've received and they don't trust the vaccine itself. And so we're going to be having to convince communities that the vaccine is safe to take. And so we have a lot of work to do, and we will be very busy at the local level. And so we can't also be trying to figure out how to fund a major transportation system. We just can't. It does have to be done by the federal government. The airports and Dulles Airport specifically has done a better job than Metro in talking about the safety precautions they have put in place and they are putting in place. Early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about how transit was unsafe and planes were unsafe to fly, and how you're going to, definitely get COVID if you get on a plane at all. But the airports have done a great job talking about the airlines, how often that they recycle the air. Dulles Airport has put out more than once commercials and PSAs on just from when you walk into the airport to when you walk out, how safe it is, that the fact that they are enforcing social distancing, that they are enforcing using masks, that they are doing all that all the airplanes are being washed down after every use. All that's being enforced and talked about. And so while we did see air traffic down as much as 94% early on, when I talked to Michael Cooper from Metropolitan Washington Airports recently, he said now it's at about 75% down. So it is coming back, and it's coming back with the message of, we're here and we want you to fly, but we want you to fly safe. And I think that's going to be really important to transit also, because transit got a very kind of bad rap on, that it's not safe. And so Metro has to do a good job partnering with county government officials, talking about how it's safe to come back and why it's safe to come back and that type of thing. Because if we don't, people will not get back on, especially since the roads are not as busy. I mean, really, if you have a car, really, why go get on Metro if it's not going to take you an hour to get, to DC from Loudoun County? If you can get there now, with 20 minutes less, you're going to get in your car. And so the other thing I'd like to see Metro talk about is, we know that the Metro ridership is going to decrease during the workday because people are going to telework more. And so a very large PR campaign about, using Metro for all of your travel. So when you want to go down to the Smithsonian, spend a Saturday down there, get on the Metro and do that. We're going to have to talk to people kind of more one-on-one about why this system is important to us and how we keep it going during this time. And it's going to take at least a year for us just to assess where we are, to be quite honest. It just is. I mean, this pandemic has hit everything. I mean, it's a 100-year pandemic, for God's sake. None of us have ever been here before. And so we have to figure it out. It's going to take at least a year for us to figure it out. But I do think the key in that time is communication, and continuing to talk to people about the pandemic, what's safe, what's not safe, and really, really encouraging people to get the vaccine.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point too, about cars. And that's kind of my fear after all this, because it does seem much more convenient just to hop in your car, right? Well, there's been some anecdotal stories out there that people are going out and buying cars, maybe for the first time ever. And my fear is one day we all just get back out there and it is chaos. And it could just be like flipping on a light switch, and so.
Well, then everybody get back on Metro if that happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, that might be what it takes, for people to get back. And look, we're all creatures of experiment and experience, right? Whatever works, whatever's the path of least resistance in terms of, usually that's what's going to win out. And Metro for so long has been that. That's why it's carried 750,000 riders a day. And was the second busiest subway system in the country.
And that's why it's so important to us. And again, there's not a single elected official in Northern Virginia, no matter, all of us on MBTA were frustrated, and no matter the issues with Metro, we all know how important Metro is to our economy. We all know how important Metro is to transit justice, all those things. We know that. And so we are all very in support of Metro being safe and being healthy.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think there has been a really coordinated effort by the airlines to kind of let people feel comfortable, to show them. I mean, American, United, Delta, they have all offered for us as reporters to come in and see how they're cleaning the things.
Exactly.
So we probably do have to get to those kind of levels. Congressman Connolly, I hate to interrupt you. If I could ask you a quick question, there's a really good one here in the Q&A, and maybe, everyone could weigh in on this. Do you see transit operators, because we're talking about a vaccine, do you see transit operators as essential workers who should get the vaccine sooner than some other populations? Now, that's a really interesting question. How many doses of the vaccine do we get? The efficacy of some of these vaccines, who is essential and who isn't? What's kind of the talk about that at the federal level?
Thank you, Adam. And if I look distracted, we're awaiting votes on the floor, so I'm a little nervous about when they may call votes, and I'm trying to follow debate on the floor while also doing this. So I forgive me. We had a conference call with the Governor Northam and his cabinet last night, and this was a topic of conversation. How do you prioritize the limited number of vaccine doses we're going to have? So right now, for planning purposes, over the next month or so, Virginia is anticipating 70,000 doses of the vaccine. Now, we're a state with 8 million people. So what we're debating, what we're grappling with in Virginia is applicable to the question you ask about, well, what about all transit workers? I mean, are they all first responders? Well, there's no question that in dealing with the public, they, to me, qualify as essential workers. but we're going to be given the limited doses we're going to have for the next few months. We're going to have to prioritize even among essential workers. And so we're going to, obviously we're going to have to start with healthcare, frontline healthcare workers first, nursing home workers first. But we're going to quickly run out of doses, right? Okay, done. What about, technicians? What about X-ray technicians? What about custodians in medical facilities? What about, grocery store workers? What about, dental workers? On and on and on, right? And pretty soon now, we've gone from 70,000 to several 100,000. And if you include transit workers, you expand it some more, all justified, but we're going to have to figure out a system of prioritization. Phyllis mentioned, we're in a pandemic that none of us have experienced in 100 years. And getting it right about how you prioritize who gets vaccinated would have been very different 100 years ago than today. For example, the Spanish influenza was most deadly and most adversely affected young, healthy people. So if you vaccinated the elderly and the very, very young, you would have missed the most important phenomenon about the Spanish influenza, which was, no, they are actually less vulnerable than healthy 20-year-olds who are in the peak of health. And when that virus invaded their bodies overreacted and they died. I mean, they died in droves. And they brought the virus with them in World War I to the trenches of France and Belgium. So you would have been wrong if you'd bet, hey, when we give these limited vaccines, if we'd had one then, let's start with the elderly. That would have been a wrong decision. Today, that would be the correct decision because we do know from data that the most vulnerable age cohorts are, 80 and above, 70 and above, 60 and above, in those decimals. So I think this is going to be something that's going to be as much about science and public policy and ultimately judgment, right? I mean, I bet you if I went to Jeff and I said, from your point of view as chairman of Fairfax, how would you create a pyramid of priority for who gets vaccinated? It might be different than what Phyllis would look at because she may have a different perspective given Loudoun's, So we're going to debate about this, but right now we only have 70,000 doses to manage, which means, we're not really going to be fighting a lot about this because most of us realize we're going to run out fast. But if we have quickly, like 1 million doses, then I think the fight gets pretty substantial because why not this group and why not that one? And you're overlooking this one. So transit workers, that's a long way of saying transit workers certainly are going to be in the mix. Certainly they are essential workers. And we've got to try to protect anybody who's interacting in essential work for essential workers with the public.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Senator Boysko, your thoughts on that?
The host has to unmute her.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Did I do it? Okay. We are really lucky in Virginia that our governor is a medical doctor who believes in science, who has followed the data. If you look at the hot maps around the country, Virginia is still in the cool section. And that is in huge part to Ralph Northam and his calm, reasoned, science-based approach to handling this pandemic. With only 70,000 vaccines available at the beginning, of course, we're going to have to go to make certain that our frontline healthcare workers are first in line. And then I think there has been the CDC as well as Virginia have decided that our people in our nursing homes and our elderly are right there. But I mean, I think it's also essential that we look at the people who are putting their lives on the line for us every day, whether it's our grocery store folks, whether it's the people who are coming in and making sure that our transportation system is working, the people who are in the food area, like, you know, our poultry plants and our other farm workers. They are very vulnerable as well. And I look forward to a time when we have the capacity to be able to serve everybody who needs one. But again, wearing a mask, making sure that you're doing physical distancing as we move through this are just crucial until we can get our vaccines. And I will tell you also, you know, I serve in the Senate and we are going in person in January. We just finished our special session where I had to go and be with my 40 colleagues, and some of them don't believe in the virus. We have a couple of deniers, but because we wear our masks and we do stay distanced from one another, we feel like we're, you know, taking care of ourselves. And I know that our transit system, they have required that if you get on a bus, you enter from the back so that you're not putting the driver at risk. Same thing where there is just some separation. So as long as we are maintaining the good hygiene, keeping our masks on, keeping physical distance, I think we've got to make sure that that goes hand in hand with who gets a vaccine, because we've seen other countries who have been successful at managing the pandemic by taking those kinds of precautions. And I think that's the way we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, and in the early days of all this, we did see a lot of bus operators who were contracting the disease. A lot of train operators obviously worried about themselves. I believe Metro has something like 400 confirmed cases of COVID. Unfortunately, they've had 2 deaths. But that pales in comparison to places like New York City, who have lost dozens and dozens of people. And it's really been tough. Jeff, obviously, you know, this is a debate that it's. Hello, can you hear me? There you go. Jeff, obviously, this is a debate that's just not going to be on a federal level, on a state level. It enters your household, right? I mean, who gets the vaccine first?
Yeah, and you know, this is going to be a challenge. You know, I think we need some very distinctive CDC guidance. I mean, putting, you know, again, local governments that are battling every other element of this pandemic down to getting food relief to people and then saddling them with picking the winners and losers isn't always the best strategy either. So it starts with good, strong federal guidance. And then as Jerry mentioned, you know, 70,000 is wholly unrealistic in Virginia. And I agree entirely with Senator Boysko about, you know, the governor's work in Virginia trying to control this virus. And Phyllis and I get on calls with the governor regularly through the regional commission, which are very helpful. But I got to tell you, let me put this in perspective for you. No matter what group we talk to, of course, there's a good case to be made for them to be in the front of the line for vaccination. The one group we haven't talked about here that are essential to our economy are our teachers, our public school teachers. If we were to vaccinate our FCPS employees in Fairfax County the way we should, so that we can strategically put ourselves in a position to reopen schools, that's almost 24,000 people working for FCPS. 24,000 in one school district in Virginia to reopen schools. And we're talking about 70,000 initial doses coming to the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, I mean, we must keep these things in perspective. With transit operators, in my mind, absolutely essential personnel, essential to in so many ways. But with transit operators, there are also ways to kind of harden and safeguard their workplaces. And some efforts have been made to do that. And I think that's why we're not as bad off as other areas. But Metro, you know, is in a tough financial situation, as we just mentioned. So there's limits in what they can do. And if we are going to put a full court effort into convincing people in a way that we shouldn't have to convince them, because the statistics support this, that transit is safe, and get back on our train system, we're going to have the operators to be able to support that. And so I definitely see them as a critical group that needs to be vaccinated. But I ask everyone to think about the context of the numbers that the congressman just shared with us, because those are the same numbers he shared with us in Fairfax County. And, you know, that you're not going to get through, if you want to base it on age first, you're not going to get through the vulnerable elderly population alone with that number. If you want to say it's only healthcare workers, you're not going to get through the healthcare workers alone with just that number. And so I think what we need to be focused on is the inadequacy of that, and how if that becomes the norm, then you're putting all of us in local government, all layers of government really, in an impossible situation of trying to vaccinate all the people that we think are critical, not only who are medically vulnerable, but are critical to our economy and critical to our way of life. And so, this perspective is something that I think everybody has to take under consideration. And frankly, goes back to the seriousness under which this pandemic has been approached from day one. I mean, we should not be here. I realize that, this vaccine may come at a record amount of time getting it here, but we shouldn't be sitting here talking about 70,000 doses in the Commonwealth of Virginia with the destruction that's happened to human life and to our economy. That is wholly unrealistic to serving the people that we were elected to defend and serve. And so I think a lot of our conversation moving forward will be about how we can dramatically increase that number, because that number as a starting point doesn't get us there.
So let me give just a moment of maybe a little more optimism. So the 70,000 doses is the Pfizer dose that came online first because they got their emergency, but Moderna came online very soon after, and they have received theirs. Both Pfizer and Moderna's efficacy rate is between 90 and 94. In any vaccine, an efficacy rate between 50 and 60 is good. It's actually very good. So 90 to 94 is fantastic. AstraZeneca's efficacy rate's about 74, so that's a little lower. And then Johnson & Johnson will be coming on after. And so what we know is the first tranche, which is Pfizer, is 70,000. But we expect and we hope that the others will be coming online soon also, as well as not all the vaccines, messenger RNA that they're using have to be frozen at that degree. Some of them do, some of them do not. Some of them have to have 2 vaccines, some of them only have to have 1. And so there is some hope for the vaccines. I agree with Jeff completely that we shouldn't be here. We should not be here. Having said that, what the CDC has said and is that Dr. Reed has said that as of now, we're going to have 5 phases, phase 1A, 1B, phase 2, 3, and 4. And they've laid those out, and I have received, already 3 briefings on how the vaccine should work. If everything goes to plan and people are willing to get vaccinated, and we need to have about 70% of people to be vaccinated to start talking about the herd immunity rates. But if everything goes to plan, by June, everyone who wants a vaccine should be able to receive one by June, which is actually pretty quick. And the question is going to be how we scale up, not after, by March or so. Will we have the vaccines to scale up? We should. Every indication says we should. But the question is how we scale up. Do we put them in every Walgreens, every CVS, every Giants? Do we have events like we did for testing? Those are a little tougher because getting a swab in somebody's nose is not the same thing as injecting in somebody's body. So it's a little tougher to know if you should do those events, the vaccine events, large scale. So there would be a lot of things to discuss of how we do a vaccine. But the 70, which is, Jeff is completely right. I mean, that didn't even take care of the hospital workers in Northern Virginia, for God's sake. But it won't be that for a long time. And we do believe we're going to see. I have been, laying up at night, reading about these vaccines and what they are and when they come, and the fact that the messenger RNA vaccines, which is really kind of interesting, for just weeks now, I've been reading about them. And so we won't be at 70 for a very long time. And we have to, in Loudoun County, we are already being briefed and already having discussions on how to do it to scale so that when they are available, we can get people vaccinated very quickly.
If I could just add a little bit, though, I'm all for Phyllis's optimism, and I agree with her. Hopefully, we're going to scale up such that by late spring, early summer, vaccination will be common and ubiquitous. However, we can't overlook the fact, it depends on what vaccine we're talking about. Right now, these 70,000 vials really raise an equity question in terms of affluence versus non-affluence. And frankly, Northern Virginia often versus the rest of Virginia, because the Pfizer vaccine requires sub-zero temperatures. Really hyper low temperatures has to be maintained. Can't be at room temperature, can't just be refrigerated. Now, that has implications for, well, what facilities have that capacity? For example, your average nursing home doesn't have that capacity. So that means the vaccine's got to be transshipped to those hotspots. Well, the transshipment requires sub-zero temperatures too, right? Can't let it go room temperature in the truck. And so, because otherwise the efficacy could be affected. And that, the efficacy Phyllis cited could go from 90% to, in theory, 0 if you don't maintain that drug at the right temperatures. So I worry about the fact that, well, right off the bat, sophisticated medical facilities, of course, as we have in Northern Virginia, will have that capacity already due. But you go Southwest Virginia or other parts, in Appalachia, and you're not going to find a lot of facilities, medical or otherwise, that have that kind of capacity to begin with, which automatically means that so long as the vaccine that's available, whether it's 70,000 doses or 700,000 doses, can only go to those facilities that can handle it. So our hope is that we will have other choices, as Phyllis said, that require refrigeration, but not this kind of super cool preservation environment, because otherwise you're going to have massive equity issues that I think are going to be quite disruptive. And Jennifer and her colleagues are going to have to wrestle with that. In other words, if you're lucky enough to live in Loudoun or Fairfax or Arlington, you're going to get vaccinated. But if you're just misfortunate enough to live somewhere that doesn't have that kind of infrastructure to be able to store and transship the vaccine, you're out of luck. Your family and you will not be protected anytime soon. That's a big issue for us if we can't work that out.
That is why, that one reason, that's why who's in office is so important, because people in office have got to look, we will look out for everybody, and we will be talking to our colleagues all around Virginia. But Chairman Connolly, from all that I have read and from the 3 briefings that I've received, you are right. It has to be stored at that temperature, but it doesn't go in the body at that temperature. And so there is a time where you have it, where it gets to a temperature where it can go in the body. So it can be shipped if it's shipped fast enough. Can be shipped to be used if it's going to be used pretty quickly. And that's, of course, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is also 2 vaccines, by the way. AstraZeneca has 2 vaccines. We don't know yet if, Pfizer's 2 vaccines. We don't know yet if AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are going to be 2 vaccines, or if they have to be stored at that temperature yet. So first of all, Mr. Connolly, you're right. I am an eternal optimist. I really am. But I've also done a lot of reading about this, and so I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist too. I've done a lot of reading about this, and I believe we are going to have to fight for the people who otherwise wouldn't get the vaccine, and we're going to have to do some convincing and some explaining to people in marginalized communities and communities of color that this vaccine is safe, that this is not the Tuskegee experiment again, and that they can take the vaccine. I heard today that President Obama, President Bush, and President Clinton are going to do the vaccine, take their vaccine on television for the purpose of trying to encourage people and show them it's safe. So that's what leadership looks like. And we may have to have a vaccine event for the elected officials so people can see us take it so that they know it's safe.
That's really
and as you know, Phyllis, we even had to do that with the flu shot to emphasize the importance of it. We all got our flu shot on camera. And I think probably the takeaway of this whole conversation, regardless of your level of optimism, is this is going to take an incredible amount of patience and empathy from people. And seeing as we've been at this since March, people are worn pretty thin. People are angry. People are upset. And everyone, who wants to get the vaccine is not going to be able to get it on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. And right now, even the most optimistic, timeline that Phyllis has outlined is still going to take a tremendous amount of patience for people to understand why you have to do it in certain order, why you have to do it systemically to make sure that you're protecting not just the most vulnerable, but also keys to the economy. And people are going to have to exercise some patience. And there are some people who, just because they can afford access to it, are not critical in terms of the types of workers that we've been talking about on this call. If you're sitting at home on a Zoom call in the comfort of your own home, and you can afford this vaccine and find means to which to get it, you must be thinking about the transit worker, the grocery store worker, the healthcare worker, the first responder, and the teacher who's going to be needed in your kid's classroom if your kids are ever going to go back to school. And that's going to take an amount of patience that we need to be talking about now. And the reason I'm emphasizing these numbers for people is because there's a lot of folks who think that the day the vaccine comes out, everyone's just going to be able to go down to Rite Aid or Walgreens and get their vaccine. And that is not how this is going to happen. And we need to start building a groundwork for understanding of that.
Yeah, that's true.
As the moderator of this program, I recognize that this is not exactly the vaccine show and this is about transportation, but it is so on top of everyone's mind. And it really does affect everything. The beginning of this question started with who should get it, air travel rebounding, and it all really does hinge on what happens with these vaccines and when people feel safe and comfortable. So thank you for allowing that conversation to happen. And it's brilliant. And Chair Randall, I'm right there with you. I'm staying up pretty much every night. I think a lot of us have had sleepless nights reading about this kind of stuff. All right, so listen, we have about 20 minutes left if it goes that long. And I do want to bring it back down to some, transportation related questions and, just kind of looking at the long-term impacts of things. And Senator Boysko, I'll start with you. There's a question in the Q&A about what we should do now or in the next year to try to predict traffic and mobility patterns. But I'll take it one step further. Should things go back to the way they were, or should there be some change, or will there be some change?
Well, I think there should be some change. I think that I think we've seen, like, I rarely get into my car if I don't have to go more than 2 miles. I'm walking an enormous amount more than I used to. My husband is biking an enormous amount more. So I think continuing our investment in multimodal transportation, including pedestrian and bike paths, is absolutely crucial. I think continuing to invest and improve our rail system is incredibly crucial, and we are on track to do that through the last couple of years of our legislation that we've passed. I think cleaning up the fuel sources that we have been using, going to more electric and alternative fuels, is vital for our environment. We know that it's actually the transportation system that so greatly contributes to our greenhouse gas emissions and carbon challenges that we're facing since we're getting hotter and hotter years. I was just hearing something today about that. So I think that this has been, while it has been a very difficult time, this has been a time for us to kind of take a deep breath and to pause, to see what is possible, what changes we could do, how we could do things better. And I look forward to a time when we can have a new normal and, have our economy recovered, but also remember that we don't necessarily have to be racing from place to place to place in our cars every single hour of the day. We can do some things remotely. We could, get places in different methods. I could walk down to my meeting instead of driving. Taking this pause has forced me to do a lot of that. And I think that I have a better mind about it,
Congressman Connolly, if I could pick your brain for a second. I know something has changed when it enters my 10-year-old daughter's lexicon. When she starts talking about something, she's obsessed with Tesla. She loves electric vehicles. She wants that to be the future of transportation. On a federal level, what kind of push are you seeing for, electrified vehicles, that kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, I remember when your daughter was born, Adam. I
Oh,
can't
wow.
believe she's 10.
No, but get it. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Um, I think the question's a really good one, and I think we don't really know yet. It's a little premature. So there's going to be a lag time, no question, right? So the idea that as soon as I get that vaccine and you get that vaccine, I'm on that train going to work every day, crowded cheek to jowl and, holding the strap and feeling good. I don't think so. I think we're going to be very gun shy for a while about crowded places. On the other hand, there's going to be, I think, an exuberance to return to that new normal Jennifer just talked about, and hopefully it looks more normal than new. And we've seen that in other countries, sometimes prematurely, and it leads to real tragedy and bad things. Jeff made a point that I think is absolutely true. We've been doing this now since February, March of last year. We're tired. We're tired of it. We're sick of it. Get it over with, please. Somebody get that magic bullet and let us return to, regular life where we can hug. Phyllis talked about being, extroverts, and many of us in public life are extroverts, although many are not. But we need human contact, right? It is, for a politician, it's an unnatural act that I can't hug, kiss, schmooze, pat the back, shake hands, whatever it is, but physical contact. That's what we do as a human expression in politics. And it's also a normal kind of human expression for everybody. So I think there's going to be this pent up demand that might exhibit itself pretty quickly, but there are going to be long-term changes. Retail, how we buy things. I think, having had the experience of doing it on the internet and how easy it is and how expeditiously it arrives, I think that's a habit that's probably going to be long lasting. Changing the physical configuration of the workplace. So the idea of, cheek to jowl cubicles, I don't think so. I think we're gonna be satisfied with better spacing and fewer people physically coming in on any given day. We're gonna have a high tolerance for remote working and teleworking as we move forward. And I think that's a permanent change. Even how we greet each other may be permanent, right? We may not want to shake hands ever again. We may want to do this or bump the elbow, or I just think for a while, we're going to, having gone through this, I don't think we want to take unnecessary risks. So I'm not quite sure what's likely to be permanent and what's likely to be just sort of holding back until we feel confident again. And I don't think any of us really know that. The experience of the pandemic 100 years ago was we pretty much returned to old habits pretty quickly. I mean, once it kind of finally died down, we went back to normal life, and the 20s were roaring, right? And we enjoyed illicit booze and, bootlegging and, illicit cabarets and everything else, cheek to jowl. So I'm not predicting, of course, any illegal behavior post-pandemic, but I do think that the desire to return to normalcy is going to be very strong.
Chairman McKay?
Yeah, I agree with the congressman. I do think some of the permanent structural things that we've talked about are a little overblown, because I do think there will be a point where we get back to normal. I think the real question is, when is that? What is the date of that? And that's what, really nobody knows. And for us at local government, we have a lot of concerns about how we do that. For example, I think Jerry's right with changes in habit in retail, changes in habit in commercial office space. As I mentioned earlier in this call, if those two things constrict themselves significantly, those have a profound economic effect on local government because of our antiquated tax structure in Virginia. And so if those two things happen, local government's going to pay a hard price. On the other hand, there's huge environmental benefits to having those two habits take place in so many different ways, not just cutting down car traffic, but there's also benefits to health. As Jennifer said, can I walk down the street to the grocery store? I know with my own family, we've discovered a million new places we can walk to from our home. We knew they were there. We always knew they were there. We'd never tried walking to them before, and it was ridiculously easy to do. And so how long will people continue to do that? How will that affect not just our health, but our economy in the long term? I think those are questions that, we're all asking ourselves. I do know this, we partnered with the Economic Development Authority in Fairfax to kind of write a recover from the economy game plan, so to speak, so that we can be thinking ahead of time about things we can do in the county to structure not just this new post-pandemic world, but frankly, what opportunities do we have to rebuild our community better than it was before? Because one thing this pandemic has shown, and everyone has noticed it and said it, is there was great disproportionality in who was affected most. And so how do we take that data now and not just think about it in terms of vaccines and other things, but how do we take that data to not put ourselves in this same situation if we were to have a pandemic like this again in the future? Can we make efforts to strengthen and improve the lives of people who right now are most vulnerable? And so I know we're looking at not just how we rebuild our economy, but how we can rebuild it better. And the big question mark in everyone's minds is, when does human behavior start to change back to looking a little bit more like it did before the pandemic? My sense is it will happen sooner than a lot of people think, but it will happen in stages. It'll happen in waves as people become comfortable. And it's something I think we're all going to have to watch very carefully.
Yeah, and certainly there are a lot of people who are pent up and want to get back to the way life was. People want to go back to an office. There are people who enjoyed their commute. There are people who knew people on their commute, and all those intricacies that have just kind of gone away. People do enjoy that. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how that shapes itself. Chair Randall, do you care to add a thought on that?
So, I agree completely that I think people will want to get back to normal as soon as possible. But I will also say this. As a mental health therapist, I also believe that after this is over, we are going to see people who have been in their homes by themselves, who are going to be struggling with some mental health issues. And mental health is health. And so there are going to be people who have anxiety, people who suffer from PTSD already. Isolation is one of the worst things that we could do for them. Loudoun County is about 10% of our population are veterans. I have actually asked in our county government to put aside $500,000 to just deal with the mental and behavioral health issues that I believe we're going to see post-pandemic. And truthfully, one of the ways we will start to get past that is to get back to normal. And I hope the normal is more normal than new as soon as possible. And so I think people are going to, because normality feels right to people and it feels good to people. And whether that's back in their cars, if they used to be there, or back on the bus or transit, if they used to be there, people will come back because they want to have that normal again. Normal feels safe. Normal feels secure. Normal is what they're going to want. And so it is going to happen in stages, but it's going to happen faster than people think. What we have to do is make sure the vaccine scales up to the goal of being normal again. Because if you don't have that happens, then we'll be back in a tough place. But I do think that it's going to happen. And I will say to my friend, Mr. Connolly, listen, I want to go to the mall. I don't know about everybody else. I don't want to shop online. I want to get up. I want to go to the mall. I want to shop at the mall. I actually want to try the shoes on at the mall. That's what I want to do. So I think you're going to see some of that happening again. And I think you're right, Adam. People enjoy their commute sometimes. They put the music on and that was, some people did carpools. They enjoyed that. That was their time, to decompress and be by themselves. I am an enormous extrovert married to an enormous introvert. If you ask my husband, he is absolutely fine right now. He is just fine. But I want to get back out there, and a lot of people want to see that. And so I think you're going to see that return, which is why I actually think that you're going to see traffic return on the roads before you see people get back on transit. Which is why I will go back to it is so important for transit agencies and to do as the airports and airlines have done and talk about the safety of coming back on transit, because people are going to want to get out, but they want to do it as safe as possible. And so we have to tell them that doing it on transit is safe.
Phyllis, just an observation in trying to predict what's going to be. If you look at the reaction to the denouement of the 1918 pandemic, two things. enormous exuberance. And secondly, they almost blotted it out of their minds.
Yeah.
For most Americans, it was news to learn there was a pandemic 100 years ago, which was far more consequential in terms of morbidity and mortality than this one. Affected far more people. Somewhere between 50 and 100 million people died worldwide. Many times what have died already here in the United States. And yet you'd never know that because people stopped talking about it. They didn't want to turn back and remember it. And they actually kind of did a pretty good job of blotting it out of historical memory until recently.
Right. Yeah.
So if that's the model, we may be prepared faster than we think to move on real
Yeah,
quick.
but the Roaring '20s was all that illicit alcohol for a reason.
Yeah, that's right.
They were drinking for a reason.
And for the record, of course, I disapprove.
Right. Sure. Well, listen, this, I think we're fast running out of time here, and I see Jeff has popped up back here on the screen, and Doug has been patiently waiting and taking notes throughout this whole thing. You guys are a great panel, and there's some news made on this. So if, don't be surprised if you show up in a local newscast, but of course.
Adam, I got to add something about Jeff Fairfield.
Go
If
ahead.
there's an unsung hero on getting the silver line, it was Jeff Fairfield. Jeff fought so hard for the tax district, both for the uniform tax district and when that failed and then for the 2 bifurcated tax districts, and never took any credit for it and did yeoman's work. We all owe Jeff Fairfield a debt of gratitude. The silver line would not have happened without efforts like his.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Well,
saying that. Jeff is an unsung hero in the
Well,
community.
Thank you very much. And all I can say is I just can't wait for that day when we're all going to ride that train. Not only to Dulles Airport, but right out there to 772.
Got that right. Yeah.
Loudoun Station.
That's right.
That's going to be a grand day. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. A wonderful panel. We're so fortunate to have in our region such well-informed, articulate, and forceful advocates for transportation. Many thanks to Adam, who's been a friend of DATA for many, many years, and we'll look forward to your continued involvement in Northern Virginia and its transportation issues. I know these have been challenging times. They've been challenging for me, but I'm absolutely convinced better days are ahead. Life will return to normal. And we'll all be having fun again soon. So, and my final point is, Jerry, if you can make that $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill work, actually become law, hallelujah, and I'll be the first one to say congratulations. Been talking about that for 20 years. So hope for the best. Okay, anything else we need to cover, Doug? Incidentally, we're in a membership drive, DATA. Anybody wants to join, we're welcome. Check our website, datatrans.org. Be plenty of work ahead for 2021 as we reintegrate the workforce to full employment. Doug, any final comments?
I just say thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate your participation. I know it was a big chunk of your time today, but we really appreciate it. And happy holidays and stay safe.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.